What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video by the Bear Report. Today, we're going to take a look at a company that has a lot of traction among retail investors, and that's Nano-X Imaging. We have evidence that this investment idea could be a disaster in the making. But before we get into this, go ahead and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on our future videos. And also, don't forget to like the video if you enjoy this content. So, the first thing we're going to go over falls under management, where we'll look at the poor execution and transparency that builds to the bear thesis. Then we will analyze their primary medical imaging device called the Nano-X.ARC, going over the quality of the device, which leads us to our overall bear thesis on this company. Before we dive into those details, we really need to have a better understanding of what the underlying business does first. So, the company claims they have drastically improved the 100 basically 100-year-old over 100-year-old X-ray technology of current systems, which cost a boatload of money, up to around $3 million to extreme cases, and they use significant energy for cooling, and they require very, very large rooms because of the size of these systems. This essentially limits many regions around the globe to have access to this technology. Altogether, as Nanox reiterates, leaving two-thirds of the world's population with no access to medical imaging at all. Patients who do currently have access to medical imaging face high potential fees and often have to wait weeks or even months for their scans, which could be matters of life or death in some cases, depending on their condition. But the company just earned FDA clearance on their primary Nanox.ARC multi-source device. It's supposedly an innovative X-ray system that costs significantly less than current systems, and as seen down at the bottom here, connects to their Nanox cloud to allow geographically separated doctors to quickly review images, which current systems don't allow. Additionally, Nanox is also offering a very cost-effective medical screening as a service MSaaS pricing model where customers pay per scan instead of paying for the device up front. Management claimed that these three advantages will help them deploy their 15,000 systems that they have contracts with across the globe by 2024. Those are management's words. It's currently 2024, and we still have no systems deployed and are burning cash at an unsustainable rate, which I'll get to later. Management also claimed that the Nanox Arc costs between $8,000 and $12,000 to develop and install for their customers. And if you see here in the bullet points, I made a mistake of labeling 15,000. The initial number is between 8 and 12, actually. Unfortunately, there was a major scandal with the SEC revolving around this, and hurting the company and the former CEO, which many bulls want to overlook. But we will get into this later as well. For comparison, though, the systems in the field today cost between $1 million and $3 million to manufacture and deploy. Now, the company supposedly is able to drastically reduce its system's cost by re-engineering the X-ray source. Traditional systems use what is called a hot cathode design, which requires extremely high voltage and special cooling in order to produce the energy needed to take X-rays. This is why current X-ray systems take up nearly an entire room in some hospitals. Represented on the right here, Nanox uses a new technology called cold cathode, which requires much less cooling and electricity. And this innovation in itself has allowed Nanox to miniaturize its X-ray source, and its systems can be deployed as a single ring in X-ray table, which is seen down here below. All of Nanox.ARC systems will be connected to this Nanox cloud, which I mentioned previously. This has two incredible potential impacts. First, Nanox will use its own proprietary software platform and partner with artificial intelligence and machine learning companies to basically streamline radiology diagnostic services and streamline billing control for patients, which it technically has done already, and some of it has been done through acquisition. But perhaps even more importantly here, this design will allow images to be reviewed by experts across the globe in nearly like real time, no matter where the images are being taken. This mode stands to dramatically increase patient outcomes and reduce costs because patients and medical providers have access to experts without the cost of travel. Nanox is also introducing this new pricing structure, which I mentioned called the MSaaS pricing model, that is intended to make it already significant cost reductions even more affordable for medical providers because Nanox has apparently reduced the manufacturing and installation costs. The company intends to cover the cost of the system and charge customers on a pay per scan MSaaS model. Over Nanox's 4,500 plus contracted orders right now, Nanox will keep $30 per scan. Change. It was originally actually $14 per scan. It was changed at a minimum between 7 and 15 scans per day. This means providers can de-risk the installation of systems, which should help significantly with adoption. But under this untested model, Nanox assumes risk up front, but over the long term should benefit from this recurring revenue stream because it's basically very similar to your software as a service companies, the models like Salesforce and Amazon Web Services, for example. Now, what we are going to get into is management first. This is where we will take a look at the SEC scandal, poor execution with the FDA, a lack of transparency, and then the CEO step down, and a little bit of insider selling, which I don't want to focus on too much. So, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, known as the SEC, charged Nanox and its former CEO, Rand Poliakine, for making negligent misrepresentations about their manufacturing costs of their Nanox.ARC. The complaint by the SEC alleged that from of August 2022 to May 2021, Nanox and Rand claimed that the Nanox.ARC, their multi-source, their primary medical device, marketed as a low-cost alternative to existing X-ray devices, could be mass-produced for between $8,000 and $12,000 per unit. However, the SEC's investigation found that Rand ignored the higher cost estimates provided by company executives, including engineering executives, while promoting the lower manufacturing costs. This misleading cost estimate was included in reports filed within the SEC prior to Nanox raising $165 million in its IPO. And the company continued to use the estimate in the subsequent financial filings and repeated it in various earnings calls and media interviews. So Nanox and the former CEO agreed to settle the charges without admitting or denying the SEC's allegations. As part of the settlement, Nanox consented to the entry of a final judgment that includes permanent injunctions, a civil penalty of $650,000 for Nanox, and a $150,000 penalty for Rand. In addition to that, Rand was ordered to pay $266,000 in disgorgement plus prejudgment interest. The case was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York on September 29th, 2023, with a qualifying judgment order dated October 3rd, 2023. And this is concerning because this was going on for years until made public in 2023. And I think many bulls want to ignore this, but I mean, this is deeply concerning. I don't want to take the path of fraud, but it definitely treads that line. So, separate from the SEC allegations with misleading investors, Nanox also had issues with the SEC for inaccurately reporting to them on 9 separate occasions, which are 9 letters I'm about to show right here. All of these letters range from flawed accounting practices, marketing and cost claims, collaboration agreements, conflicts of interest, FDA clarifications, financial statement clarifications, and a little more. These can be accessed directly in the SEC's website, so you can look for yourself. but they range from their IPO until today, current. The number of letters from the SEC to Nanox is somehow, again, overlooked by retail investor bulls. The frequency of the SEC comment letters sent to publicly traded companies varies, and it depends on several factors. But in general, the SEC's division of finance is responsible for reviewing filings under a couple acts. I believe it's the Securities Act of 1933 and 1934, actually. So the SEC adopts a risk-based approach for selecting periodic filings for review, with larger market cap companies often receiving the most frequent. But it's rare. But over the recent years, I will say there has been a noted increase in the volume of these letters issued, and particularly aimed at small to mid cap public companies. However, though, the SEC's comment letters typically focus on critical disclosures that may conflict with the SEC rules or applicable accounting standards, or disclosures that appear to be deficient and need clarification. In other words, poor execution and a lack of transparency. And think about this process as like a dialogue where the company responds to the SEC's comments based on this interaction, and they may amend its filings if needed or whatever. But here's the thing: often, I mean, the frequency of SEC comment letters is usually at zero for companies with excellent management teams. It just doesn't happen. It's not normal. But to play both sides, like I mentioned, there has been an uptick in the SEC communication today, especially towards the smaller companies. But this level of scrutiny by the SEC toward Nanox is extremely concerning. It shouldn't be happening this frequently and as many times as it has been happening since IPO. So now we're going to take a look at the CEO step down, and I want to go too in depth on this, but insider selling as well. The CEO step down was very sudden. There was not much detail on why. Usually, companies that are going through a transition like this, they give some additional info, but there wasn't much. Rand did stay on board, but Erez Meltzer took the reins as the new CEO. Then, when the SEC allegations were released to the public, I mean, it all made sense to a lot of, bulls and bears, why ultimately Rand decided to step down. Then, when we shift our attention below to insider selling here, since IPO, Rand has sold just over 50% of his position, leaving him with just over 2.5 million shares. This isn't that concerning to me like the other companies we have looked over, but I wanted to note this for everyone. Then the new CEO, Erez, I believe he actually exercised his options and let them vest, or he has directly bought. This was extremely difficult to navigate on their website and SEC for some reason. It was very difficult. However, he doesn't have much weight attached to his insider ownership. And I will show you what I'm talking about in this next slide. Here we have the insider ownership at IPO on the left, and then on the right is current as of the last transaction, which are both March 31st, I think. Yeah. When we look at Rand's position on the left, after the offering, which was exercised, he was left with just over 10% of the company. Below that, Erez's position was around 0.01%. So, Erez's position is very small. It's not even worth talking about. But transitioning over to current, Rand now owns 4.5% of the business, representing over 50% of his position being sold since IPO, like I mentioned. Erez actually added to his position, which still equates to around 0.01%. And another thing that we should note about Mr. Meltzer is he has exercised options and has let them vest, which brought his position to nearly 128,000 shares at one point, and then dumped them upon FDA clearance for the Nanox.ARC multi-source. His position, however, is still larger than it was at IPO, even though there is not much weight attached to his stake. Now, this is something bulls don't want to analyze either. They don't understand the consequences of these setbacks and how it also falls under management's poor execution, especially as a pre-revenue medical device company. Nanox faced regulatory challenges during the FDA review process for its ARC device. In August, uh, in August 2021, the FDA temporarily paused its review of the multi-source Nanox.ARC. The pause was due to the FDA's request for additional information about the device, stating a list of deficiencies in its 510K filing, which was submitted in June of that year. And Nanox was given a 180-day period to respond to these concerns, which was eventually cleared after months of cash burn. But this is what bothers me and how management didn't learn from their mistakes. This regulatory hurdle followed a similar situation early in the year regarding the 510K filing for the single source Nanox.ARC, which is different, where the FDA also requested further information. In early 2021, the FDA requested additional information about the X ray bed, particularly regarding its intended use in comparability to the predicate device. This request put the submission on hold temporarily. They are obviously both cleared now, but the consequences from the delays and poor execution had a material impact to the company's balance sheet, putting them in a poor liquidity position. I mean, they're just burning cash from this. They're not generating any revenue. The FDA does not mess around either. They hold a lot of power on what goes and what doesn't, obviously. With similar cases like above, the FDA has a history of bumping companies to a more rigorous clinical process if they aren't cooperating or essentially feel like their time is being wasted with deficiencies. In this context, like a class 3 medical device. So they could have bumped Nanox to a class 3 medical device where it would require trials, which would have absolutely thrown this thesis down the drain. So the company is actually lucky this didn't happen to them. This is interesting here. Now, Nanox is known for being very vague and at times unprofessional in their Q&A segments of their earnings calls. So there's nothing new about them acting the way they do towards analysts. But this is the Q2 2022 transcript. I dug through all of their earnings calls since IPO, and there have been similar occurrences like we see here. But this was the most bizarre and unprofessional exchange I've seen from a management team since Helios and Madison Analytics in 2018. The company went bankrupt. It, for context, this is when the company's FDA submission for the multi-source was put on temporary hold. But analyst Suraj Kalia asked a basic question regarding a basic time frame on the multi-source submission, since the company is burning cash, generating no revenue from their primary product. So it's a very valid question. I mean, shareholders want to know. Arez then goes on and gives a loophole answer to the analysts. Siraj then basically tries to answer the question by asking a question. Then he gets rude. Arez gets rude. The analyst becomes frustrated here with a more detailed question. Then Arez answers, beating around the bush and all flustered here. Siraj decides to transition into another question, respectively. Arez doesn't answer that question again. Finally, Siraj gets very annoyed, and Arez ends the exchange with a very bizarre sequence of yas. I wanted to show everyone this because this falls directly under management and it's deeply concerning when the head of your company acts like this and displays no transparency about the direction of your company. I mean, you can find this in the Q2 2022 earnings call. You can listen to it, read the transcript, do whatever you want. It's there. But there's also similar occurrence like this throughout 2022 and the end of 2021. Next thing I want to look at is their financial statements. It doesn't really have an impact here since the company is basically pre-revenue, but there are a couple important metrics that need to be analyzed when you are looking at a pre-revenue company. So I wanted to show you this as in preparation for the next slide, in that some metrics are actually improving slightly. Nanox reported $7.5 million in revenue for the 9 months ended, 9 months, indicating a 16% increase year over year. So that's good. Most of this is due to their ancillary services, not their Nanox.ARC, since it's not generating any revenue yet. When they mentioned the $99,000 in their last earnings report for their imaging systems, they were referring to their 2D systems in Africa, not the Nanox.ARC multi-source. That's not generating revenue yet. Net loss was a negative $50 million, and this is actually a decrease of 16%, which is good in comparison to year over year. Operating expenses actually fell as well year over year. Cash reserves increased year over year due to a direct offering where the company sold $30 million worth of shares, and I think that price per share is around $14 fixed. However, that resulted in dilution, obviously. EPS also improved, and stock based compensation is down significantly. So that's good. And here we go. Since the company does show signs of distress on their balance sheet when looking at the big picture, I also wanted to give a breakdown on the company's liquidity position, which we suspect there may be long term liquidity problems, even with the assumption that the Nanox.ARC is scaled or in the process of scaling. What we are going to do here is calculate the company's monthly cash burn rate with their cash reserves and see how much longer Nanox is able to operate until they run into major liquidity issues. As seen here at the top, I have the cash position for the business at just over $66 million, which is according to their recent earnings report for the 6 months ended, and the negative cash flow from the operations, which is net cash used in operating activities, and that was negative $32 million. 32.2 million. I have left out capital expenditures and the inconsistency of the direct offering, uh, capex specifically, because this number will widely fluctuate. It also would add to a greater cash burn rate if we used it, which I don't deem fair in this activity. To get the total cash burn for 9 months, we're going to use that $32.2 million number. Then to get the monthly cash burn rate, we will take the total cash burn rate for 9 months, which is our 32.2 million, then divide that by 9 for 9 months. We then get our monthly cash burn rate of $3.59 million. So this is how much cash the company is burning monthly. Then to get the amount of months until cash runs out for the company, we take our cash reserve position of 66.737 million divided by the monthly cash burn rate, which is 3.59 million. This will give you 18.6 months left until the company runs out of cash to fund operations. Now, hold on a second. You're probably like, well, that's still a long time for them until they scale their product and start generating revenue. Yes, that this is true. It's relatively long, but what many fail to realize is how much the undisclosed manufacturing and delivery and logistics costs will be, potential labor costs, the research and development uptick as the company scales, financing costs, capital expenditures, marketing and sales expenses, and other minor expenses. And remember now, this is the same company that got caught lying about the costs of their devices, including manufacturing, delivery, and logistics. On top of the company not even giving us color on these costs, we don't even know how sustainable or effective this untested MSaaS pricing model is. So investors are pretty much navigating in uncharted waters, betting on this company's future. Uh, will they have to continue to dilute shareholders with direct offerings? Look for third party financing? The answer to these questions are concerning for long term bulls and remain relevant. Now that we have gone through everything under management, I wanted to get into what makes our ultimate bear thesis on this business, and that's their low quality medical devices. What we are looking at now is from their most recent Investor Day presentation at the end of December in 2023, which was overall very disappointing. This slide depicts three separate types of scans, which are your traditional X-ray first, the Nanox.ARC in the middle, and then our CT scan at the end, which isn't what we want to focus our attention to. We want to focus on the traditional X-ray and the Nanox.ARC, the tomosynthesis comparisons. I spent hours trying to understand the differences, because we need to know what these scans actually do. So, traditional X ray imaging produces a two-dimensional image where all the structures along the path of the X ray beam are superimposed on top of each other. This means that the bones, tissues, and organs all overlap, which can sometimes make it difficult to distinguish between different structures, especially if they're located close to each other or if one is behind another in the path of the beam. Partially overlapping tomosynthesis, or known as our Nanox.ARC, is a type of imaging that takes multiple X ray pictures of the body from different angles. These images are then processed to create a series of slices that can be viewed sequentially. And this technique reduces the overlap because it separates the structures into different slices, supposedly giving the radiologists a clearer view of areas that might be obscured in a traditional 2D X ray system, so our traditional X rays. However, some overlap can still exist between the slices, but it's significantly less than in a standard X ray. And to put it simply, traditional X ray gives you a single flat image where everything is layered on top of each other, which can hide some details. Tomosynthesis is supposed to provide multiple slices that separate these layers to a certain extent, offering a like a pseudo 3D view that can make it easier to identify and diagnose certain conditions, particularly in dense tissues like the breast or I guess like complex anatomy like the joints. During this presentation, Nanox management reinforces how their Nanox.ARC improves visualization for bone fractures in comparison to traditional X ray methods. I'm about to show why this couldn't be further from the truth, though. Now, this is a comparison between the traditional X ray and the Nanox.ARC device images. I thought these images were a joke at first. I'm not even kidding, I really did. But as you can see for yourself, the traditional X ray is much more clear than the Nanox.ARC, which is very blurry. But it gets worse as we go further. This is probably one of the worst of the mix. Maybe the pelvis images we'll see next two are pretty bad, but this is a comparison again of the left wrist in a cast and the images of the Nanox arc. The arc doesn't even penetrate through the cast, so it's you can't even see the bone. The traditional X-ray being clearly more effective here. Again, we have our comparison between the two systems, and by a long shot, the traditional X-ray is the better option here, with the Nanox arc not even being able to penetrate to the bone. So I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't know why they would show these images because it just does not look good. It doesn't present well. The quality of the Nanox arc seems to be extremely poor. Then this is an ankle fracture with a cast. To cut some slack here, this image, in my opinion, shows better quality and slight favor to the Nanox arc. Um, but this now signals to me that the arc is inconsistent and primarily depicts low quality images. And for our last comparison, we have the spine and rib cage. Again, the clear winner here is the traditional X-ray image, being able to pick up the spine, better resolution of the rib cage, and even a detailed picture of the human lung. The Nanox Arc has difficulty even picking up the spine, rib cage, and there seems to be no definition of the human lung like the traditional X-ray image. After showing you these images in their Investor Day presentation, which was a major letdown overall, they had the audacity to say their device gives enhanced visualization to inform clinical decisions. I don't know about you guys, but the images I saw and that were presented were worse than the traditional methods. The quality is so poor in comparison. I mean, I'm worried now, like radiologists and orthopedics would likely have a difficult time trying to give a diagnosis by using these machines. So this leads us to a major problem with the company. The Nanox Arc is as low quality as it gets in comparison to traditional X-rays. If you're unable to make an accurate diagnosis from Nanox's devices. What's even the point in having their machines on an MSaaS pricing model as a customer? Wouldn't traditional methods be more consistent and reliable option here? I mean, you wouldn't be able to make a diagnosis. The issue now is the entire bull thesis is likely scrapped from this investor day. If the Nanox.ARC truly produces images like we just saw, it's not a good sign at all. Finally, we now get to our ultimate bear thesis with this company. The poor execution and lack of transparency by the management team with the SEC reporting, allegations, and FDA delays is extremely concerning for trust in management and shareholder confidence. With this going on, the company also misled investors about their medical devices, essentially lying about the cost, getting fined for doing so, leading to a step down of the former CEO, Rand Poliakine. Then, since management has done such a poor job on execution, the company now runs into a liquidity problem in order for them to successfully scale their product. And for the cherry on top, which we believe breaks the bull thesis completely, is the quality of the images produced by the ARC, being as low quality as it gets when we compare it with traditional X ray methods. So we suspect that this investment idea is a disaster in the making for long term bulls and urge them to carefully examine the big picture of what they are really getting into here. But that is it for this video. If you enjoyed this, give it a like and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on our future content. Right now, we are aiming for a video every 2 weeks, uploading on Mondays. Hopefully, we can eventually get to a video per week. Thanks for watching.